Elias Alcott threw the letter into the fire and watched his own words burn reliable, capable, sensible. No romance, no complications. 7 years a widower, and he'd just paid a marriage agency to send him a stranger. His hands shook. Not from cold, from something he'd buried the day he'd buried his wife. He didn't know a woman was already on a train west, laughing to herself, carrying a carpet bag, and a secret that would tear his ordered little world clean apart. If you love a story where the loneliest heart learns to feel, again subscribe and stay with me all the way to the end. And do me a kindness. Tell me in the comments what city you're watching from, so I can see how far this story travels. Now let's begin. The train from Cheyenne was late, which suited Elias Alcott just fine. He stood at the far end of the Coulter Flats depot, with his hat pulled low, and his arms crossed over his chest. And he told himself, for the 10th time, that this was a business matter, and nothing more. "You look like a man walking to his own hangin'," said Tobias Reed, who ran the mercantile and had no business being on the platform except that the whole town knew what Elias was waiting for. "Mind your store, Tobias. Store's mindin' itself. This is more interesting." Tobias leaned against a post and grinned around the stub of a cigar. "A mail-order bride. For Elias Alcott. Lord, if your wife could see you now." Elias's jaw tightened. "She ain't a bride. She's a housekeeper I'm marryin' for the sake of decency and the law. There's a difference." "Is there?" "There is." Tobias laughed low and easy. "Whatever helps you sleep, friend." Elias didn't answer. He watched the empty track shimmer in the heat and thought about the letter he'd written, the one he'd copied out 3 times, because his hand kept shaking on the word sensible. He'd asked for a reliable, capable, sensible woman. No romance, no complications. A woman who could cook and clean and keep a house running while he ran the ranch, and who would ask nothing of him in return but a roof and a name. He'd been very clear about that last part. Nothing in return. The whistle blew far off, and Elias's stomach dropped like he was 17 again. "Here she comes," Tobias said, delighted. The train pulled in slow, all steam and screech and iron groan, and the few folks on the platform craned their necks. Elias stayed where he was. He'd decided he wouldn't rush forward. He'd let her come to him. It seemed the dignified thing. The doors opened. Passengers spilled out a drummer with a sample case, 2 ranch wives back from Cheyenne, an old man with a fiddle. And then from the last car a laugh, a real laugh. Loud, warm, and completely unbothered, rolling down the platform before its owner had even fully stepped into the light. "Oh, would you look at that?" a woman's voice said to no one and everyone. "I have never in my life seen so much sky. Where do you people keep it all?" Elias froze. She came down the steps like she owned them. She was a big woman, broad-shouldered, full-figured, soft, in the way that made Tobias's grin widen and made something in Elias go tight and defensive all at once. She wore a traveling dress the color of a robin's egg, dusty at the hem, and a hat that had clearly given up trying to stay respectable somewhere around Nebraska. She had a carpet bag in one hand and a hat box in the other, and she was looking up at the sky like it had personally invited her. "Ma'am," said the drummer, tipping his hat as he passed. "Sir," she said cheerfully, and then to a sparrow that flitted down onto the platform railing, "And hello to you. You're a long way from anything, aren't you, brave little thing?" Tobias elbowed Elias. "Emotional about birds, you said. Reckon she wasn't lying in her letters." "Hush." The woman spotted them, then spotted Elias, specifically the way a compass finds north. Her eyes went over him, the dark coat, the set jaw, the way he stood like a fence post that had been planted and left. Something in her face shifted. It didn't fall. It didn't brighten either. It just arrived somewhere the way a person does when they finally see the thing they've been traveling toward and find it exactly as forbidding as they'd feared. "Elias Alcott," she said. "Not a question, ma'am." She crossed the platform. Up close she was even bigger, and her eyes were a brown so warm they looked lit from behind, and there was a smudge of soot on her cheek that she hadn't noticed, and he didn't mention. "Nessa Birch," she said, and stuck out her hand like a man. though I expect you knew that. Unless you've got more than one strange woman coming in on the train today, in which case we've both got trouble." Elias looked at the hand, then he took it. Her grip was firm and dry and certain, and it startled him how certain it was. "Just the one," he said. "Well, that's a relief." She let go and stepped back and looked at him, head tilted frank as a child. "You want me to be honest with you, Mr. Alcott? Or you want me to be polite? 'Cause I can do either, but I do 'em better one at a time." Tobias made a strangled sound that was almost a laugh. Elias felt the whole platform watching. "Honest," he said, because he was a man who prided himself on honesty, and because he didn't quite know what else to say. "All right." She squared up to him. "I'm steady. I'm plain. I'll not pretend I'm a beauty, 'cause the mirror and I settled that argument a long time ago, and it don't bother me anymore. I cook like an angel, I clean like the devil's on my heels, and I'll run your house so well you'll wonder how it stood without me. That's the good news." She took a breath. "The bad news is, I laugh too loud. I sing when I'm happy, and I'm happy pretty often, and I am shamefully emotional about birds. I cried for an hour once over a dead swallow. A grown woman, weepin' over a bird the size of my thumb." She lifted her chin. "So now you know the worst of me. That going to be a problem?" For a long moment Elias didn't answer. He'd asked for sensible, he'd asked for plain, and the agency, in its infinite wisdom, had sent him a woman who announced her flaws on a public platform like she was proud of them, who talked to sparrows, who looked at him like she could see clean through his coat to the cold thing behind his ribs. "No," he said finally. "Long as the house runs, we'll get along." Something flickered across her face, disappointment maybe, or recognition, or both. But she smiled, and the smile was real, and she said, "Then we'll get along fine. Wagons this way. Lead on, Mr. Alcott." Tobias tipped his hat as they passed. "Ma'am, welcome to Coulter Flats." "Thank you kindly," Nessa said. "It's very large and very empty, and I think I'm going to love it." And Tobias, who had known Elias Alcott for 20 years and had watched him turn to stone by inches after his wife died, looked at the rancher's face as he walked away and saw something there that he hadn't seen in 7 years. He couldn't have named it, but he knew it when he saw it. Trouble. The ride out to the ranch took the better part of 2 hours, and for the first while, neither of them said a word. Elias drove. Nessa sat beside him with her carpet bag on her lap and her hat box at her feet, and she looked at everything: the grass, the hawks turning slow overhead, the far blue smudge of the mountains, with an attention so complete, it made him uncomfortable. He was used to silence. He'd cultivated it. But her silence was full of things, and his was empty, and somehow that made his feel worse. "You're a quiet man," she said at last. "I am. Your letters were quiet too. Shortest letters I ever got from anybody who was fixin' to marry me." "Didn't figure there was much to say." "No," she agreed. "I don't suppose there was." She watched a jackrabbit bolt through the sage. "You said in the letter you lost your wife." His hands tightened on the reins. 7 years back. "I'm sorry. It's a long time." "That's not what I asked." He looked at her then. She wasn't looking at him. She was looking straight ahead down the road, giving him the privacy of her profile, and he understood that she'd done it on purpose, and he didn't know what to make of a woman who understood a thing like that. "It's a long time," he said again, because it was the only true thing he could manage. "All right," she said gently, and let it go, and he was grateful in a way he'd never admit. They rode on. The sun dropped toward the peaks, and then, because the silence had gone soft instead of hard, she started to hum. Just under her breath, some tune he didn't know, low and sweet, and he almost told her to stop. He didn't. He let her hum the whole rest of the way home. Coulter Flats Ranch sat in a shallow bowl of land with a creek running through the east pasture, and a house that Elias had built with his own 2 hands 11 years ago, back when he'd had a future in mind. It was a good house, a sturdy house. But when they pulled into the yard and Nessa climbed down and stood there looking at it, Elias saw it the way she must be seeing it, and for the first time he understood how much it looked like a house where a man had stopped living. The curtains were gray, the porch swing hung by one chain. There were no flowers, no garden, no color anywhere, just a gray house on gray dirt under a big empty sky, and a barn and a bunkhouse, and 3 ranch hands who had come to the fence to gawk. "Well," Nessa said. "It's a workin' ranch," Elias said, and heard how defensive it sounded. "I can see that." She set down her bag. "Who are they?" "Hands. That's Cyrus the tall one. Boy next to him's little Joe, though he ain't little, and the old one's Hobie. He's been here longer than I have. They eat at the house. They eat at the bunkhouse. Cook used to bring it out before he left." Nessa nodded slowly, and Elias could practically hear her mind working, filing things away, and he felt a flicker of something like alarm. Mrs. Hobie started, and then stopped uncertain. "Ma'am, that is, we didn't rightly know what to call you." "Nessa'll do," she said, "or Miss Birch, till the preacher makes it official. Whichever sits easier." She looked at the 3 of them, the wary old man, the tall silent one, the big shy boy, and something in her softened. "You boys look like you've been eating beans and misery for a month." Little Joe laughed before he could stop himself. Cyrus almost smiled. "Just about, ma'am," Hobie admitted. "Well, that ends tonight," Nessa said, and picked her bag back up. "Mr. Alcott, show me my kitchen. I'll not have grown men eating misery under my roof." "It ain't your roof yet," Elias said. She turned and looked at him. Not angry, just steady, that word she'd used about herself, steady like a lamp that didn't flicker. "No," she agreed, "not yet." And she walked past him into the house. Behind him, Hobie let out a low whistle. "Boss," the old man said quietly, "I don't know where you found that woman, but I don't think she's what you ordered." Elias watched the door swing shut behind her. "No," he said, "she ain't." The kitchen became a battleground within the hour. Elias found her in it after he'd seen to the horses, and she'd already emptied half the cupboards onto the table and was standing in the middle of the wreckage with her sleeves rolled up and a look of grim determination on her face. "What in the world are you doing?" "Fixin' this," Nessa said without turning around. "Your cook, God rest whatever's left of his sense, put the flour clear across the room from the stove. And the window's been painted shut, and the good light comes in from the east, and you've got the work table shoved against the dark wall like you want to chop your fingers off. That table's been there 11 years. Then it's been wrong for 11 years. Elias stared at her. "You've been in this house 2 hours. And in 2 hours I've learned more about it than you have in 11 because you don't see it. You just live in it." She turned and faced him, flushed and certain. "You want your supper on time and hot and good, Mr. Alcott? Then the table goes by the window where I can see what I'm doing before the sun's down. Light matters more than habit. It's my house. It is. And I say the table stays." She looked at him. And then, and this was the thing that undid him the first crack in the wall, she didn't argue. She just nodded slow and said, "All right, it's your table. But I'll tell you now, in 3 days, you'll move it yourself, and you'll tell yourself it was your idea, and I'll let you, and we'll both be happier for it." "That's mighty sure of yourself for a woman I met this morning." "I'm sure of some things," she said. "The rest I'm working on." And she went back to the cupboards humming and left him standing in his own kitchen feeling like a stranger. He moved the table 3 days later. He told himself it was his idea. She let him. The first supper she cooked, the ranch hands ate in a silence so total you could have heard a pin fall in the next county. They ate roast chicken and biscuits and green beans, cooked with bacon and a pie made from dried apples she'd found in the back of the pantry, and soaked back to life. And none of them said a word, because none of them could remember the last time food had tasted like something a person made, instead of something a person endured. Little Joe ate 4 biscuits. Cyrus went back for seconds without being asked, which Hobie later swore had never happened in the history of the world. And Elias sat at the head of his own table and watched his men eat like they'd been starving, and watched Nessa move around the kitchen refilling plates, and felt something in his chest he couldn't name and didn't want. "Ma'am," Hobie said, finally setting down his fork like it weighed 40 pounds. "I have been eating at ranches for near on 50 years, and I want you to know this is the finest meal I have ever had in my life. And I am not a man given to fancy talk." Nessa's face went pink. "It's just supper, Hobie." "No, ma'am." The old man shook his head solemn as church. "It ain't." And little Joe said, "Can we have pie tomorrow too?" And Cyrus, who had said maybe 6 words since Nessa arrived, said quietly, "Reckon I'd fight a man for that pie." And the whole table laughed. Actually laughed, the sound of it strange and loud in that gray, silent house. And Elias watched it happen and did not laugh, but felt the corners of something in him come loose. Nessa caught him watching. She raised an eyebrow, a little challenge, a little question. He looked down at his plate, but that night after the hands had gone and she'd washed up and the house had gone quiet, he stood on the porch and heard her singing through the window as she got ready for bed. Soft Private, a song she'd never have sung if she'd known he was listening, and he stood out there in the cold for a long time and did not go in. The days piled up one on the next. Nessa reshaped the ranch the way water reshapes stone. Slow, patient, without ever seeming to try. She hung new curtains, white ones that let the light in. She planted a garden in a patch of dirt by the porch that Elias had considered good for nothing, and green things came up out of it like a miracle. She learned the hands' names and their moods and their histories. She learned that little Joe couldn't read and started teaching him at the kitchen table after supper, patient and kind, never once making him feel small. She learned that Cyrus's silence was grief, a wife and child years back a fever. And she never asked him about it. But she left an extra slice of pie by his plate on the days when his eyes went far away, and he never said anything about it. And neither did she. She learned old Hobie's rheumatism acted up before rain, and she'd have a hot compress and a cup of willow bark tea ready before the first cloud showed, and he'd grumble that she fussed too much and drink every drop. The ranch hands began to laugh again. The silence at supper disappeared. The kitchen filled with singing she still tried to hide and no longer quite managed to. And every single night without fail, after the dishes were done and the house was quiet, Nessa Birch sat at the kitchen table by the light of a single lamp and wrote a letter. Elias didn't ask who they were for. It wasn't his business. But he noticed a man notices things, even a man who's trained himself not to. That she wrote one every night, and that she sealed them and stacked them, and that she never once asked him to post them. They just piled up in the drawer of the little writing desk. Letters to home. He didn't understand then what that meant. He would. "You watch me," Nessa said one evening out of nowhere. They were on the porch. She'd taken to sitting out there after supper, and he'd taken to sitting out there too, and neither of them had ever discussed it, but it had become a thing. They did sat in the 2 chairs with the whole enormous night in front of them, and didn't talk much, and somehow weren't lonely. Except she'd just said that, and now he had to answer. "I don't. You do. You watch me like I'm a horse that might bolt." She wasn't angry. She sounded almost amused. "What are you looking for, Mr. Alcott?" He could have lied. He was good at lying mostly to himself. But there was something about the dark, and the 2 chairs, and the way she'd asked plain and unafraid that made lying feel like more trouble than it was worth. "I'm trying to figure you out," he said. "That's easy. I'm the simplest person you'll ever meet." "No," he said. "You ain't. That's the trouble." He turned his hat in his hands. "You told me you were plain. First thing you said standing on that platform, plain and steady and emotional about birds. I am all 3. You're steady," he allowed. "And Lord knows you're emotional about birds. I saw you talk to that wren for 10 minutes yesterday like it owed you money." She laughed delighted. "It was a very good wren, but you ain't plain." The words came out rougher than he meant, and he couldn't stop them. "I don't know what you are, Nessa Birch, but plain ain't it. You walk into a room and the whole room changes. You've had my men laughing and my house singing, and there's flowers growing where there was dirt, and I keep waiting for you to settle down into the plain, sensible woman I sent for, and you just don't. You just keep being more. The porch went very quiet. Nessa didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice was different, softer, and underneath the softness, something careful and hurt that he hadn't heard before. You say that like it's a complaint. I don't know what it is. Well, she stood up and gathered her shawl around her shoulders, and for a moment she looked in the dark like a woman much more tired than the one who'd laughed getting off the train. When you figure it out, you let me know. Good night, Mr. Alcott. Nessa. But she'd already gone inside. And Elias sat on the porch alone in the chair beside the empty one, and turned his hat in his hands, and understood that he'd said something wrong, and did not understand what. That was the trouble with a man who'd trained himself not to feel. When the feeling came back, he didn't recognize it, and he stepped on the tender parts of other people without ever meaning to. The way a man walks, careless through a garden he doesn't know is there. Inside the house, the lamp came on at the kitchen table, and Nessa Birch sat down and pulled out a fresh sheet of paper and wrote another letter home. The next morning she was cheerful again. Too cheerful. Elias thought, though he couldn't have said how he knew, and she made flapjacks and told a long funny story about a goat she'd known back home, and the hands laughed, and everything was fine, except it wasn't. He knew it wasn't. Some register in him that had been dead for years had come flickering back to life, and it was picking up things the way her laugh didn't reach her eyes that morning. The way she pressed her hand flat to the kitchen table. Sometimes, like she was steadying herself against a wave nobody else could feel. You're doing too much, he told her when the hands had gone out to the north fence. You've been here, a couple weeks, and you've turned this place upside down. You need to rest. I rest fine. You're up before me and down after me. That's how a house runs. She scrubbed at a pot that was already clean. You didn't hire me to sit. I didn't hire you to run yourself into the ground either. She stopped scrubbing. She stood at the sink with her back to him, and her shoulders were very straight, and when she spoke her voice was careful and light in a way that scared him more than shouting would have. You know what my mother used to say? She asked. She said, Nessa, you make yourself so useful that folks can't do without you, and then they'll have to keep you, even if they don't want you. She laughed a small dry sound. She meant it kind. It was the only advice she had. She wasn't a beauty either, my mother, and she made her whole life out of being useful, and it worked mostly. It kept a roof over us. She set the pot down. So yes, Mr. Alcott, I do too much. I've been doing too much my whole life. It's the only way I know how to be wanted. Elias stood in the doorway of his own kitchen and could not speak. But you don't want anything but a house that runs. She went on, still not turning around. You said so. In your letter. No romance, no complications, just a reliable, capable, sensible woman. And here I am being reliable and capable and sensible right into an early grave. 'Cause it's what you asked for, and it's all I know. She finally turned. Her eyes were dry, but only just. So don't tell me I'm doing too much. Doing too much is the whole reason you kept me on. I never said. You never say anything. That's the trouble with you. But she softened even as she said it because she couldn't help it, because softening was as natural to her as breathing. I'm sorry. That was unkind. You've been decent to me. You have. It's just... She pressed her hand to her chest. It's a long way from home, Elias. It's a very long way from home. It was the first time she'd called him by his given name. He didn't know what to do with any of it. He was a man who knew how to mend fence and doctor cattle and read the weather in the color of the sky, and he did not know how to answer a woman who'd just told him her whole heart in his kitchen. So he did the thing he always did. He retreated into the practical. I'll take the letters to town, he said. You keep writing them and never send them. I'll take them Saturday. Something crossed her face, surprise, and behind it a grief so quick and deep it was gone before he could be sure he'd seen it. You don't have to do that, she said. I want to. No. She shook her head, and there was that careful lightness again. "It's all right. I'll get to it. Someday. Don't trouble yourself." And she turned back to the sink, and Elias went out to the north fence to help the hands. And he thought about the letters all day, and could not understand why she wouldn't let him send them. And it was not until much later, not until the 19th day, when he came home, and found the house too quiet, and her chair empty, and the drawer of the writing desk standing open, that he would finally understand. But that was still to come. There were good days too, more good than bad in truth. There was the day she found an injured hawk out by the creek, a young one with a broken wing, and she'd wrapped it in her apron and carried it home, and made a nest for it in a crate by the stove, and fed it scraps of meat off a spoon, and named it Ambrose, and talked to it in a low, steady voice for hours. And Elias had stood in the doorway and watched her, this big, warm, weeping over swallows woman, cradling a wild thing that would have torn a lesser person's hand to ribbons, and felt the last of his defenses go quiet. "He'll not thank you for it," Elias said. "Wild things don't." "I don't do it for thanks." "Why do you do it then?" She looked up at him, and the hawk's fierce yellow eye looked up at him too, and Nessa said, simple as anything, "Because he's hurt, and he's here, and I can help. That's the whole of it, Elias. That's the whole of everything I know how to do." And Elias thought, "And who helps you?" But he didn't say it. He wasn't ready to say it. He wasn't ready to know that he wanted to. The hawk healed. 3 weeks on its wing was strong, and Nessa took it out to the creek and opened her hands, and it launched into the sky and was gone without a backward glance, and she stood there in the wind with her empty apron and wept. Of course she wept, and Elias stood beside her and did a thing he'd never once considered doing. He put his hand on her shoulder. Just that. Just his hand on her shoulder, warm through the fabric of her dress, while she cried over a hawk that would never think of her again. She went still under his hand. She didn't lean into it. She didn't pull away. She just stood there and let herself be, for one moment, a woman who was held instead of a woman who did the holding. "He didn't even look back," she said. "No," Elias said. "But you fixed his wing. He's flyin' a cause of you. That's something he carries whether he knows it or not." She turned and looked at him, wet-eyed and startled, like he'd said something in a language she hadn't known he spoke. And for a long, terrible, wonderful moment, they just looked at each other. The two of them, a widower who'd forgotten how to feel, and a woman who felt everything standing by a creek in the middle of nowhere, with the whole empty West around them. Then Elias took his hand back and cleared his throat and said something about the fence, and the moment closed over like water over a stone. But it had happened. They both knew it had happened, and neither of them knew what to do about it. That was the shape of those first weeks. Two people circling each other, drawing close and pulling back, saying the practical thing when the true thing was right there in their mouths. Elias found himself watching for her in every room. He found himself listening for her laugh across the yard and finding the day lesser when he didn't hear it. He found himself one evening actually picking up a book, a thing he hadn't done in 7 years, not since the reading had died in him along with everything else, and he got 3 pages in before he set it down. Not because he didn't want to read, but because he didn't have the muscle for it anymore, and he'd forgotten how, and it shamed him. She caught him at it. She always caught him. "You were readin'," she said, delighted. "I was trying to. Couldn't keep my mind on it." "What was it?" "Some old thing of my wife's. Poems." He said it like it hurt because it did. "I used to read, every night. Her and me both by the fire. She'd read me the sad ones, and I'd read her the funny ones, and—" He stopped. His throat had closed. "I stopped when she died. Just stopped. Like a clock winding down. Didn't decide to. It just went." Nessa sat down across from him, slow, and folded her hands, and did not say she was sorry, because she'd learned that he hated being sorried at. "What else did you stop?" she asked instead. He looked at her. "You stopped readin'," she said. What else? A man doesn't stop just the one thing. It's never just the one thing. And Elias, who had not spoken about his wife in 7 years, who had walled that whole country of himself off and salted the earth behind him, opened his mouth and found that he could not stop. Everything, he said. I stopped everything. I stopped singing. I used to sing, if you can believe it, terrible, but I did. I stopped going to church, 'cause I couldn't stand the pity. I stopped fishing the creek, 'cause we used to do it together. I stopped. His voice cracked. I stopped feeling anything at all, Nessa. And I'll tell you the truth. It was easier. It was so much easier. I learned to run this ranch like a machine, and I told myself that was living, and I believed it. God help me, I believed it right up until... He stopped. Right up until when? She asked softly. He looked at her across the table. This woman he'd sent for like a bolt of cloth. This loud, warm, weeping over birds woman who'd walked into his gray, dead house and cracked it open like an egg. Right up until a train came in late, he said, and a woman got off it laughing. The kitchen went so quiet he could hear the lamp hiss. Nessa's eyes were very bright. Her mouth opened. And Elias, terrified of what she might say, terrified of what he had said, stood up so fast his chair scraped the floor. It's late, he said. You should sleep. Big day tomorrow. Always is. Elias. Good night, Nessa. And he fled. There was no other word for it. A grown man of 40 fleeing his own kitchen, and left her sitting there at the table with the lamp and the poems and the whole unsaid thing between them. And that night, for the first time since she'd come, Nessa Birch did not write a letter. She sat at the table a long time with a blank sheet in front of her and her pen in her hand. And she wrote nothing at all. Because the truth, she'd have had to write the truth about the man in the next room, and what he'd just said, and what it did to her, and how much it terrified her to want to stay, was too big and too dangerous to put on paper. So she folded the blank sheet and put it in the drawer with all the others, and blew out the lamp and lay awake in the dark listening to the house that was almost hers, in the life that was almost hers. Missing a home she could almost stop missing. Almost. That was the word that would break both their hearts in the days to come. Almost. The blank sheet in the drawer was still there the next morning, and Nessa pretended it wasn't, and Elias pretended he hadn't fled his own kitchen like a boy caught stealing, and the two of them moved around each other over breakfast so carefully you'd have thought the floor was made of eggshells. Coffee, she said, and set it down. Thank you. Flapjacks in a minute. No hurry. And that was all. That was the whole of it. Two people who'd cracked something open the night before, sealing it back up with weather talk and politeness, and both of them aching under it, and neither one brave enough to say so. It was Hobie of all people who nearly broke it loose. The old man came stamping into the kitchen with his hat in his hands and his rheumatism in his knees, and he took one look at the two of them. Elias hunched over his coffee like it might attack him. Nessa scrubbing a skillet that was already clean, and he said flat as a board, Lord above, what'd you two do? Nothin', they said at the exact same time. Hobie snorted. Uh-huh. He lowered himself into a chair with a groan. 50 years I've been reading Cattle and Horses and Men. And I'll tell you what I see. I see two people who said something true last night and are scared half to death of it this morning. He held out his cup. Coffee, Nessa, if you please. And quit scrubbing that pan, you'll wear clean through it. Nessa's face went scarlet. She poured his coffee without a word. That's what I thought, Hobie said, satisfied. Elias stood up so fast his chair barked against the floor. Fence needs mending on the south line. Fence'll keep, Hobie said. It won't. Boy, that fence has kept since Tuesday, and it'll keep till noon. Sit down and drink your coffee like a Christian. But Elias was already reaching for his hat, already halfway to the door, already fleeing, and Nessa watched him go with a look on her face that Hobie caught, and Elias didn't, a look of such plain wanting that the old man's chest hurt for her. The door banged shut. Nessa set down the skillet. He'll come round, ma'am, Hobie said quietly. Will he? It wasn't a question. It was a woman who'd stopped believing in coming round a long time ago. He's a good man, just a broke one. Hobie turned his cup in his gnarled hands. You didn't know him before. I did, before his Mary passed. He was the laughingest man in this whole county, Nessa. Sang in the saddle, read books, danced at every wedding for 30 miles. The old man shook his head. And then she died birthing a baby that died too, and I watched the light go out of him like somebody'd pinched a wick. 7 years. 7 years I watched him turn to stone. Nessa had gone very still. A baby, she said. Didn't tell you that part, did he? He said his wife. He never said... She sat down hard. He never said there was a baby. There's a lot he don't say. Hobie reached across and patted her hand rough and kind. But I'll tell you what I ain't seen in 7 years, ma'am, and it's what I saw this morning. I saw that man scared. And a man's got to be alive to be scared. Stone don't get scared. He pushed himself up out of the chair, wincing. You didn't turn a house around Nessa Birch. You turned a dead man back into a live one. And live men are trouble. But they're better than the other kind. He shuffled toward the door. Hobie, she said. He stopped. Thank you, she said, for telling me about the baby. The old man looked at her a long moment. I told you, 'cause you needed to know what you're up against. That grief's got a shape. Until you know the shape of it, you'll keep bumping into it in the dark. He put his hat on. You're good for him, ma'am. Whatever happens, don't let him make you forget it. And he was gone. And Nessa sat alone in the kitchen with the knowledge of a dead baby she'd never been told about and understood finally the shape of the country she'd been walking through blind. A baby. No wonder he'd asked for no romance. No wonder he'd wanted a machine to run his house instead of a woman to fill it. He hadn't just lost a wife. He'd lost a whole future twice over in a single night, and then he'd spent 7 years building a life so empty that nothing could ever be taken from it again. And here she was, loud and warm and full of birds and singing. The exact wrong medicine for a man who'd made a religion out of feeling nothing. Or the exact right one. She didn't know which. And that not knowing sat in her chest like a stone all that long day. Out on the south line, Elias mended a fence that didn't need mending and drove the posts deep and told himself it was the work that had his heart going like a hammer. Not the woman. Not what he'd said. Not the way she'd looked at him across the lamp. He was a liar and he knew it, and it didn't help. Cyrus rode out around midday to help with the wire, and the two of them worked in the kind of silence Elias was used to, the good kind, the empty kind, and for a while it steadied him. Then Cyrus, who could go a week without speaking, said the last thing on God's earth Elias expected. You going to marry her or not? Elias nearly took his own thumb off with the pliers. What? Miss Birch? Cyrus didn't look up from the wire. You sent for a bride. Preacher comes through end of the month. You going to do it or not? That ain't your business, Cyrus. No, Cyrus agreed. It ain't. He tensioned the wire slow and even. But I'll say a thing anyhow, and then I'll shut up, and you can tell me to go to the devil if you want. Elias waited jaw tight. My wife's been dead 9 years, Cyrus said. Her and my girl both. You know that. Everybody knows that. And I'll tell you what I know that nobody tells you. He finally looked up, and his eyes were steady and terrible. The dead don't need you faithful. That's a thing the livin' made up to keep from havin' to be brave. My Ellen wouldn't have wanted me to spend 9 years alone. She'd have called me a fool. And your Mary'd say the same, and you know it, and that's the real reason you can't look that woman in the eye. He went back to the wire. You ain't honorin' the dead, Elias. You're hidin' behind 'em. There's a difference. That's all I got. And true to his word, he shut up and didn't say another thing the rest of the afternoon and left Elias standing there with a fence post in his hands and the whole floor of his life dropping out from under him. You ain't honorin' the dead. You're hidin' behind 'em. He'd have given a year of his life to be able to call it a lie. He couldn't. That was the trouble. He couldn't call it a lie because it was the truest thing anybody had said to him in 7 years, and Cyrus had said it plain as a man reading a brand, and now it was in him, and he couldn't get it out. He rode home in the long gold light with his chest full of it, and he'd half made up his mind, half only half, to walk into that kitchen and say a true thing back to her for once, when he came into the yard and found little Joe waiting for him at the gate with a face like a funeral. Boss, the boy said. Boss, there's a man come. While you was out, a stranger. Come askin' after Miss Nessa." Everything in Elias went cold. What man? Didn't give a name. Older feller. Come in a hired rig from the depot. Joe swallowed. He's in the parlor with her now. Been in there near an hour. And boss... The boy's voice dropped. She's been crying. I heard it through the window. She's been crying the whole time. Elias was off his horse before he'd fully decided to be. He crossed the yard in 6 strides, and he told himself it was nothing. A relative, a friend, and he did not believe it for 1 second. Because men did not come 1,000 miles in hired rigs to deliver good news. And because Nessa Birch did not cry easy, she wept over birds. Sure, but that was a soft grief. A happy, sad kind of crying. And little Joe had said she was crying the whole time, and that was a different thing altogether. He stopped at the door. He could hear voices inside, low, the man's and hers, and he did a thing he was not proud of. He listened. "Can't just show up," Nessa was saying, and her voice was wrecked, thick and shaking. "You can't just come here after all this time and... I came because your mother's dying, Nessa." The man's voice was heavy, tired, old. "I came because she asked for you. What was I supposed to do? Write it in a letter and let you find out 3 weeks too late?" The world tilted under Elias's feet. Her mother. Dying. The letters. All those letters every night to home. The letters she wrote and never sent. The mother who'd told her to make herself useful so folks would keep her. "How long?" Nessa said. So quiet, Elias barely heard it. "Doctor gives her weeks, maybe less. She's been asking for you every day, girl. Every single day. 'Where's my Nessa?' she says. 'Where's my Nessa gone?'" The man's voice broke. "I didn't want to be the one to come. God knows I didn't. But there wasn't nobody else. Your sisters are scattered to the wind, and you're the one she wants." A long silence. Then a sound that went through Elias like a knife. Nessa breaking down all the way down the loud, unashamed grief of a woman who felt everything and could hide none of it. "I can't," she was saying. I can't. I just found Uncle. I can't leave. You've got a place here? Is that it?" The man's voice sharpened, disbelieving. "You wrote me you weren't sure. You wrote me the man barely spoke to you, that you didn't know if you'd stay. You wrote me you were lonesome as a ghost out here, Nessa. Those were your words." Elias's hand tightened on the door frame until his knuckles went white. Lonesome as a ghost. That was what she'd been writing. All those nights. That was what filled the drawer. Not letters home about a happy new life. Letters home about how alone she was in his house at his table 3 feet from him and 1,000 miles from anyone who loved her, writing to a dying mother the truth she could never say to his face. "That was before," Nessa said. "Before what?" "Before it changed. Things changed. He's what?" "He's married, you know." "He hasn't, has he? It's still just an arrangement, still just a bargain." The uncle's voice gentled, and that was worse. That was so much worse. "Nessa, honey, listen to me. That man out there bought himself a housekeeper. That's what he wanted, and that's what he said, and that's all this is. Your mother's the only person left on this earth who wants you for you. Not for what you can cook or clean or fix. For you. And she's dying. And she's calling your name." A pause. "Come home. Come home while there's still a home to come to." And Elias Alcott, standing in the doorway of his own house, understood that he was about to lose her. Not on the 19th day as he'd half dreamed in some corner of his mind. Now. Tonight. To a dying woman and a train heading east. And there was not one single thing he could say to stop it. Because every word the uncle had spoken was true. He had bought himself a housekeeper. He had said no romance, no complications. He had given her nothing but a roof and his silence and let her cry herself to sleep, writing letters she couldn't send, and told himself he was being honorable when he was only ever being a coward. He could go in there right now and say, "Stay." And what would it mean? Stay and watch your mother die 1,000 miles away for the sake of a man who's never once told you he wants you. It'd be the cruelest thing he'd ever done. So he did the only thing his broken, honorable coward's heart could think to do. He backed away from the door, and he went to the barn, and he saddled a fresh horse in the dark, and little Joe came running after him saying, "Boss, boss, where you going?" And Elias didn't answer, because he didn't have an answer, because for the first time in 7 years, he was feeling everything, all of it all at once, and it was too much, and he ran from it the same way he'd run from the kitchen, the same way he'd been running his whole life, since the night the light went out. He rode out into the dark, and he did not know where he was going, and he stayed gone for 3 hours. When he came back, the hired rig was gone from the yard, and the light was on in the kitchen. He led the horse into the barn slow, and rubbed it down slower, putting off the moment, and when he finally couldn't put it off any longer, he crossed the yard and stood at the kitchen door and looked in through the window. Nessa sat at the table. The lamp was low. She wasn't writing a letter. She was just sitting there very still with her hands folded on the table in front of her, and her face swollen from crying. And there was a valise on the floor beside her chair. Not the carpet bag, the big one, the one you packed when you weren't coming back. And Elias understood that she'd made her decision, and that it had been made for her, and that all his running had changed nothing at all. He opened the door. She looked up. "You're back." "I'm back." "Little Joe said you rode off like the devil was after you." Her voice was flat wrung out. "I didn't know if you were coming home tonight." Home. She still called it home, even now. "My mother's dying," she said before he could speak. Plain, no softening. She'd stopped softening, he realized. That was how he knew how bad it was. "My uncle came to fetch me. There's a train Thursday. I'll need one of the boys to drive me to the depot if that's all right. I know it's an imposition. I'll pay for the Nessa. The trouble out of what you owe me, we can settle up before Nessa." He crossed the kitchen and pulled out the chair across from her and sat down, and he made himself look at her, made himself not flinch from the wreck of her face. "I'm sorry about your mother. I'm so sorry." "Thank you." Automatic. Empty. The politeness of a woman who'd cried herself hollow. And Elias, who had spent 7 years unable to say a true thing, opened his mouth to say the truest thing. He had "Don't go, stay. I want you. I've wanted you since the train came in late, and you got off at laughing." And what came out instead, because he was a coward, because the fear was bigger than the love was. "How long will you be gone?" Her face closed like a door. He heard it the second it left his mouth. "How long will you be gone?" Like she was going to town for supplies. Like this was a schedule to be managed. Like her dying mother and her breaking heart were a gap in the household to be planned around. "I don't know," she said, and her voice had gone somewhere far away. "A while. Maybe a good while." "The house'll keep," he said, digging the hole deeper, unable to stop. "And I can get by, and when you come back." "I'm not coming back, Elias." The kitchen went silent. He stared at her. "What?" "I'm not coming back." She said it gently now, and the gentleness was the worst thing of all, because it meant she'd stopped fighting, because it meant she'd already grieved this, and he was only just now catching up. "My mother's dying. When she's gone, there'll be the house to see to, and my sisters to gather, and there's a whole life back there, Elias, that I left to come out here and be a housekeeper for a man who barely speaks to me. And I thought..." Her voice cracked just once, and she pressed it flat again. "I thought maybe it could be more than that. For a while there I let myself think it, but it isn't. You told me what it was the day I got here, and I should have listened. No romance, no complications. Just a reliable, capable woman to run your house." She stood up. "Well, now the house needs a new one. I'll leave you the recipes. Nessa, that ain't..." "It's all right." She wasn't crying now. That was the thing that would haunt him. She'd stopped crying. She'd gone dry and steady and plain the way she'd called herself at the very start, and he understood now that plain was what she called herself, when she was protecting herself. Plain was the wall she built, and he'd driven her back behind it with 3 words. "You've been decent. I mean that. I'll remember it kind." She bent to pick up the valise, and Elias sat frozen in the chair and watched her do it, and every cell in his body screamed at him to stand up, to take the bag out of her hand, to say the one true thing. And he could not. He could not. Because the last time he'd let himself want something that much, it had died in a bed upstairs and taken his whole heart into the ground with it, and he was too afraid. He was just too afraid. She got the valise. She straightened. She looked at him one last time. "For what it's worth," she said. "I was happy here, some days, more than I let on." A ghost of a smile. "The birds out here are something else. You've got a whole flock of meadowlarks in the east pasture, and I don't think you've ever once heard 'em sing. You ought to sometime, before you forget how to listen altogether." And she walked out of the kitchen and up the stairs to spend her last 2 nights under his roof, and Elias sat at the table where she'd fed his men and taught little Joe his letters, and cracked his dead life open like an egg, and he put his head in his hands, and for the first time in 7 years, since the night he'd buried his wife and his son in a single small grave, Elias Alcott wept. He wept because he'd found the most alive thing he'd ever known, and he was going to let her walk onto a train Thursday morning, and he was too much of a coward to stop it. And the worst part, the very worst part, was that he understood exactly why she had to go. Her mother was dying. Of course she had to go. But she didn't have to go forever. That part was his doing. That part was the, "How long will you be gone?" The no romance, no complications. The 7 years of hiding behind a grave and calling it honor. She wasn't leaving because her mother was dying. She was leaving for good because he'd never once given her a reason to come back. He could still give her one. He had 2 days. He lifted his head. He wiped his face with the heel of his hand. And somewhere in the wreckage of his chest, something that had been dead for 7 years cracked open and drew a breath. The next morning she came down and made breakfast like nothing had happened. Flapjacks. Coffee. She fed the hands, and they ate in a silence that had teeth, because word had gone round the way word does on a ranch, and every man at that table knew she was leaving Thursday, and every man at that table blamed Elias for it, and nobody said so, and everybody's face said so anyway. Little Joe couldn't eat. He pushed his food around his plate and finally burst out, "You can't go, Miss Nessa. Who's going to teach me my letters? I'm only up to the M's." And Nessa's careful wall cracked right down the middle. She came around the table and knelt by the boy's chair and took his big, rough hands in hers. "Joe, honey, listen to me." Her voice was shaking. "You are going to finish those letters. You hear me? All 26. And then you're going to read every book in this county, because you are smart. Joe, you are so much smarter than anybody ever bothered to tell you, and I will not have you stopping at M." She squeezed his hands. "Cyrus'll help you, won't you, Cyrus?" Cyrus from across the table said gruffly, "I'll help him. There, see?" She smiled at the boy, and it broke everyone's heart because it was a real smile with real grief underneath it. "You're going to be fine. You're all going to be fine. You were fine before I came, and you'll be fine after." "We wasn't fine before you came," Hobie said quietly, not looking up from his plate. "We just didn't know it yet." And that landed in the room like a stone in a pond, and nobody could say anything after it, and Nessa stood up fast and went to the stove and gripped the edge of it with both hands and breathed, and Elias watched her back and her white knuckles and hated himself with a completeness that felt almost like peace. That afternoon he found her in the garden. The garden she'd planted in the dirt he'd said was good for nothing. She was on her knees in it, pulling weeds, tending it one last time, tending a thing she'd never see grow to harvest, because that was who she was. That was the whole of her. He's hurt, and he's here, and I can help. That's the whole of everything I know how to do. "Nessa, I'm leaving it for whoever comes next," she said, not turning around. "The garden. Tell her the tomatoes want water every day, but the peppers like to dry out between. And I don't want whoever comes next." Her hands went still in the dirt. "I don't want a new housekeeper," Elias said. His heart was going like a hammer. Everything in him wanted to run, wanted to say something practical, wanted to hide behind the grave one more time, and he planted his feet against all of it and made himself stay. I want to say a thing to you, and I'm bad at it. I'm about the worst there ever was at it, so you'll have to be patient with me. Can you do that? Can you just stay kneeling there and let me get it out before I lose my nerve? Slowly, she sat back on her heels. She still didn't turn around, but she went quiet and she waited, and that was enough. When you got off that train, Elias said, laughing at the sky, I thought, Lord, what have I done? I sent for a plain, sensible woman to run my house, and they've sent me a whole storm, a whole weather system of a woman. And I was scared of you from the first minute, and I told myself it was annoyance, 'cause annoyance is a thing I know how to feel, and the other thing ain't. He swallowed. Hobie told you about my Mary, and the baby. I know he did. I can tell by how you've looked at me since. So you know why I asked for no romance. You know I wasn't looking to feel anything ever again. I'd made a whole life out of feeling nothing, and it worked. It worked. Nessa for 7 years. It worked. Until a train came in late, she said very softly. Until a train came in late. His voice broke on it. And I've spent every day since trying to shove the feeling back in the box, and I can't. The box is broke, you broke it, and I've been so busy being scared of that I forgot to tell you the one thing that matters, which is... He stopped. She turned around. She was looking at him now, kneeling in the dirt with soil on her hands and tears standing in her eyes. And she was in that moment the most beautiful thing Elias Alcott had ever seen in his life. And he understood that he'd been calling her plain in his own head, the same way she called herself plain out loud, as a defense, as a wall, as a lie you tell to keep from wanting what you can't survive losing. Which is what? She whispered. And Elias opened his mouth to finally say it, and a horse came pounding into the yard at a dead gallop, and a voice was shouting his name, and it was one of the hands from the far pasture, hatless and white-faced, hauling his lathered horse to a stop and yelling, Boss, boss, come quick! It's Hobie, the old man's collapsed. He's down at the corral, and he ain't moving. We can't wake him, boss. You gotta come now. And the moment shattered like glass on stone. Nessa was already on her feet, already moving. The grief, the leaving the unsaid thing between them, all of it gone in an instant because someone was hurt, and someone was here, and she could help. And she picked up her skirts and ran for the corral faster than Elias would have believed a woman her size could move, shouting over her shoulder, Get my bag from the kitchen, the black one, and hot water, and every clean cloth in the house. Go, Elias, go. And Elias went. They found the old man crumpled in the dirt by the corral fence, gray-faced and gasping. One hand clawed against his chest, and Nessa dropped to her knees beside him in the dust and got his collar open and her ear to his heart in the space of a breath. Hobie, Hobie, it's Nessa, can you hear me? Squeeze my hand. She had his hand in both of hers. There. Good. That's good. You stay with me, old man, you hear? You don't get to leave me too. Not today. Not you. The old man's eyes fluttered. His lips moved. Told you. He wheezed barely a thread of sound. Told you. You was good for him. Hush. Don't talk. Save your strength. Girl. His clawed hand tightened on hers with the last of what he had. His eyes found Elias standing frozen and useless above them. Boy, you listen. You listen to me now. Every word cost him. Don't you let her... on that train. Don't you dare. You fool. Don't you dare let her... And his eyes rolled back, and his hand went slack in hers, and Nessa Birch bent over the old man's chest and started to work like her own life depended on it. And behind her, Elias Alcott stood with the whole terrible truth crashing down on him. At last that he had 2 days, and now maybe less. That death did not wait for a man to find his nerve, that everyone he loved was always slipping through his hands while he stood there frozen and afraid. And he dropped to his knees in the dirt beside her and said the only prayer he'd said in 7 years. Don't take him too, he whispered. Please, don't take another one. I'm begging you, don't you take another one from me. And Nessa, working over the old man's heart, Her hands, sure and steady and desperate, did not look up. But she reached out one dirt-streaked hand and gripped his hard for just a second, the two of them kneeling together in the dust with a dying man between them, and then she let go and went back to work. And she said in a voice that shook but did not break, "Then help me keep him. Then help me keep him." And Elias, for the first time in 7 years, did not freeze. "Tell me what to do." "Get behind him. Lift his shoulders. Get his chest up easy, that's it." Her hands never stopped moving. "Cyrus, where's Cyrus?" "Here." Cyrus was already there, already down in the dirt with them. "Ride for the doctor in Coulter Flats. Now, fast as that horse'll go, and don't spare it. Tell him Hart. Tell him old man Hart been down 5 minutes breathing shallow. Go." Cyrus was gone before she finished the sentence, and they heard the horse tear out of the yard, and Nessa bent back over Hobie with her ear against his chest, and the whole world narrowed down to the wet rattle of an old man's breathing. "He's breathing," she said. "He's still breathing. Elias, keep his head up, keep him warm, get a blanket under him off that dirt." And to little Joe, who stood frozen and white with his hands over his mouth. Joe, look at me. I need you. You hear? I need you to run to my room and get the brown bottle off my washstand, the little brown one, and a spoon, and you run like the wind. Can you do that?" The boy couldn't move. "Joe, he's gonna die," little Joe whispered. "Like everybody. Everybody dies here." "Not today, he ain't." Nessa's voice cracked like a whip and the boy jumped. "Not while I've got breath in my body. Now run, Joseph, and don't you dare cry till it's over. You can cry all you want after I'll cry with you, but right now you run." And little Joe ran. The next hour was the longest of Elias Alcott's life. Nessa worked over the old man in the dirt while the light went long and gold, and she did not stop, and she did not panic, and she did not once let go of the thread of him. She got the brown bottle into him, drop by drop, when Joe came pounding back with it. She kept his head raised and his chest clear and talked to him the whole time, a steady low river of talk. "Stay with me, old man. You owe me. I made you willow bark tea for a month, and you never once said thank you. You don't get to leave owing me. That ain't the kind of man you are." And Elias knelt beside her, holding the old man's shoulders, and watched her do it, and understood finally and completely what he'd been about to lose. Not a housekeeper, not a cook. This. A woman who ran toward the dying instead of away. A woman who'd looked at a broke old man collapsed in the dust and refused. Flat refused to let death have him. The doctor came at a gallop, just as the sun touched the peaks, Cyrus right behind him, both horses blown and streaming. And Doc Fenwick took one look at the scene, the old man breathing steady, now propped and warm and dosed, and looked at Nessa kneeling in the dirt, with her sleeves rolled up and her hands sure, and he said, "Who did this?" "I did," Nessa said. "Did I do wrong?" "I gave him foxglove 3 drops. His heart was." "You did exactly right." The doctor was already down beside her, already listening to Hobie's chest, already nodding. Racing heart gone irregular, the foxglove steadied it. 3 drops was exactly right. A drop more and you'd have killed him, a drop less, and he'd have gone on his own. He looked at her hard. "Where'd you learn that?" "My mother." Nessa's voice wavered for the first time. "My mother taught me. She birthed babies and set bones and doctored half our county because there was no one else. She taught me everything she—" And here the wall cracked right down the middle because her mother was dying 1,000 miles away, and Nessa had just used her mother's own hands to hold death off a stranger, everything she knew. And the doctor, who was a kind man, put his hand on her shoulder. "Then your mother saved this man's life today, ma'am. Through you. You remember that?" Nessa put her dirt-streaked hands over her face and finally let herself shake. They carried Hobie into the house. Not the bunkhouse, the house, into the good spare room over the old man's feeble protests that he wasn't fit to soil the boss's linens, and Nessa told him to hush and settle, and that if he argued with her one more time, she'd dose him again, just for spite. And the old man wheezed out a laugh, an actual laugh, and everyone in the room went weak with relief at the sound of it. Doc Fenwick stayed 2 hours. When he left, he took Elias aside on the porch. "He'll live," the doctor said. "This time. But I won't lie to you, Elias, his heart's worn out. This'll come again. Months, maybe a year, maybe less. He needs rest and care and somebody who knows what they're doing close by." He picked up his bag. "That woman in there, she's staying—" Elias looked back through the window. Nessa was sitting by Hobie's bed holding a cup of water to the old man's lips, and little Joe was on the floor beside her, with his head against her arm, and Cyrus stood in the doorway keeping watch, and the whole broken family of that ranch was gathered in one lamplit room around the woman who'd held them together. "I don't know," Elias said. "Her mother's dying. Back east. She's got a train Thursday." The doctor looked at him a long moment. "Then I reckon you've got till Thursday to give her a reason to come back," he said. "Because a man could search his whole life and not find hands like that in a house. I've seen a lot of death, Elias, and I've seen a lot of people freeze up in front of it. She didn't freeze, not for 1 second." He put his hat on. "Whatever's keeping you from that woman, you settle it. Life's too short, and you of all men ought to know it." And he rode off into the dark and left Elias standing on the porch with those words sitting in his chest like coals. Inside, the house had gone quiet and warm. Hobie had fallen into a real sleep, deep and even, and Nessa had shooed little Joe off to bed and sent Cyrus to the bunkhouse. And now she came out onto the porch, drying her hands on her apron, and she stopped when she saw Elias standing there. "He's sleeping," she said. "Real sleep. His color's back. You saved his life. My mother saved his life." She said it fierce, like it mattered, like it was the most important thing in the world that the credit go right. It was her hands. I was just where they had to be. "Nessa." Elias turned to face her. His heart was going like a hammer, but he was done running. He was so done running, he'd watched an old man nearly die in the dirt, and he was not going to let this woman get on a train without hearing the truth if it was the last brave thing he ever did. "This afternoon, in the garden, before Hobie, I was trying to tell you something, and I lost my chance. And I've decided I ain't losing it again." She went very still. "Elias, let me say it, please. I've been 7 years working up to it, and if I don't say it now, I never will." He took a breath. His hands were shaking. He didn't try to hide it. "I don't want you to go." "My mother's dying." I know, and you have to go. Of course you have to go. A woman who'd kneel in the dirt for a man she barely knows is sure as sunrise gonna go to her own dying mother, and I'd think less of you if you didn't." He stepped closer. "But you said you weren't coming back, and that ain't got nothing to do with your mother. That's got to do with me, with how I've treated you. With me sitting at that table asking how long will you be gone like you was heading to town for flour, when what I meant what I should have said, what I've been too much of a coward to say since the first day." "Don't." Her voice was breaking. "Elias, don't please if you don't mean it. I want you to come back." The words came out of him like water through a broke dam, and once they started, he couldn't stop them. "I want you to go bury your mother, and grieve her proper, and hold your sisters, and do all the things a good daughter's got to do, and then I want you to come home. Here. To me. Not as a housekeeper. Not as an arrangement. As my wife. My real wife. The kind you choose and get chose back." His voice cracked wide open. "I asked for a plain, sensible woman, 'cause I was too scared to ask for what I really wanted, which was a reason to be alive again. And you walked off that train laughing, and you gave it to me before I even knew I'd asked. And I have been too much of a broke, frightened fool to tell you so, and I'm telling you now. I love you, Nessa Birch. God help me. I have loved you since the day you talked to that sparrow on the platform, and I was too scared to know it, and I'm not scared anymore. Or I am. I'm terrified. But I'm more scared of you getting on that train, and me never saying it, than I am of anything else in this world." And Nessa Birch, who felt everything and could hide none of it, stood on the porch in the lamplight and cried like her heart was breaking, which it was, and like it was mending, which it also was, both at once, the way the truest things always come. "You picked a fine time," she whispered. You couldn't have said it a week ago, before my mother, before I had to. I know. Do you know what you're asking? You're asking me to leave and bury my mother and grieve and then get on another train and come back to a man who might change his mind, who might get scared again, who might. I won't. You don't know that. No, he admitted. I don't. But I know I've spent 7 years dead and 3 months alive, and I know which one I choose, and I'll choose it every day for the rest of my life, if you'll let me. He reached out slow, giving her every chance to pull away, and took her hand. Her dirt-streaked, life-saving hand. Marry me, Nessa. Not Thursday, not before you go, there's no time, and it wouldn't be right not with your mother dying. But say you'll come back and marry me when the grieving's done. Say there's a home here waiting for you. Let me be the reason you come back instead of the reason you left. For a long moment she didn't say anything. And then she did the thing that undid him completely. She laughed. Wet and broken and real, the same laugh she'd laughed getting off the train, the laugh that had cracked his dead life open in the first place. "You fool," she said, and it was the sweetest word anyone had ever called him. "You beautiful, stubborn, 7 years too slow fool. Of course I'll come back. I never wanted to leave. I was only leaving 'cause I thought you'd never—" She pressed his hand to her wet cheek. "I wrote my mother 30 letters about you. 30. And I never sent a one, 'cause I couldn't bear to tell her I'd crossed a whole country to marry a man who wouldn't look at me." She laughed again, helpless. "And now I get to write her the last one, and tell her I get to tell her." And then she stopped laughing, because she remembered. She remembered that the letters she'd write now she'd be writing to a woman with weeks to live, that the joy blooming in her chest had a shadow standing right behind it, and the shadow's name was Too Late. "She won't get to meet you," Nessa said, and the grief came up in her all at once, wild and drowning. "She won't ever. I always thought when I married my mother would be there in the front row, crying into her handkerchief. And now she'll be gone, and she'll never know the man I—" "Nessa!" Elias pulled her in. And for the first time, the very first time, he held her fully. Both arms, her face against his chest, the way a man holds a woman he has decided never to let go of. "Then we don't wait." She went still against him. "What?" "We don't wait." His mind was moving faster than it had moved in years, the frozen thing in him gone hot and quick and alive. "You said your mother always thought she'd see you married, so let her." He pulled back enough to look at her. "The preacher, Reverend Coyle, he comes through Coulter Flats end of the month, but he don't have to. He's a 2-day ride south in Bitter Creek. I know where he preaches. What if, Nessa? What if we married before you go tomorrow, the next day, fast as it can be done? And I come with you, on the train, east, to your mother." Her mouth fell open. You'd leave the ranch in the middle of— "Cyrus can run it. Cyrus has run it before when I was laid up. The ranch'll keep." He took her face in both his hands. "You held my whole broke life together with your 2 hands, Nessa Birch. You knelt in the dirt for a stranger. Least I can do is get on a train and let a dying woman meet the man her daughter's gonna marry. Let her see you in a wedding dress. Let her die knowing you're loved, knowing you're home. Not lonesome as a ghost, those were the words in your letters. I heard your uncle say 'em, and they about killed me, but home. Wanted. Chose." His voice broke. "Let me give her that. Let me give you that. Please." And Nessa Birch, who had spent her whole life making herself useful so that folks would keep her, who had crossed a country to be plain and sensible and small enough to fit. A lonely man's narrow ask looked up at the man who was offering to cross the whole country back with her so her dying mother could watch her be loved, and she broke all the way and threw her arms around his neck and sobbed into his shoulder, the way she'd never let herself sob in front of anyone, and Elias held her up and did not let go and did not freeze and did not run. "Yes," she said into his neck. "Yes, yes. Take me home. Both our homes. Take me home, Elias." They were married 2 days later. Not in a church. There wasn't time. Cyrus rode south through the night and half the next day and came back with Reverend Coyle in his rig, the old preacher grumbling about the pace, right up until Cyrus told him why. And then he grumbled no more, just set his jaw and said, "Drive on, son, drive on. I've married folks in a hurry before, but never for a better reason." They married in the ranch yard in the gold of a late afternoon, with Hobie propped up in a chair on the porch, because he flat refused to miss it, wrapped in 3 blankets, and looking 100 years old, and grinning like a boy. Little Joe stood up as best man, because Elias asked him to, and the boy cried so hard through the whole thing, he could barely hold the ring. Cyrus gave the bride away, walking her across the yard with his hat in his hand, and his face as soft as anyone had ever seen it. And when the preacher asked who gives this woman, Cyrus said in a voice thick as syrup, "Her mother would if she could, so I'll do it in her stead and stand for every soul that loves her." And Nessa lost herself completely, and the whole yard lost itself with her. She wore a dress the ranch hands had cobbled together from what could be found Hobie's late wife's lace veil dug out of a trunk in the bunkhouse where the old man had kept it 30 years, a length of pale blue silk Doc Fenwick's wife had donated when word got round. Wildflowers little Joe had picked from the east pasture, the meadowlark pasture, the one Nessa had told Elias about the night she was leaving. And when the preacher said the words, and Elias took her hand and slid the ring on, he leaned in close, so only she could hear, and he said, "Listen." "To what?" "The meadowlarks. You told me I never heard 'em. I've been listening for 3 days now, ever since you said it." He smiled, and it was the smile Hobie remembered from before the laughingest man in the county. "They're out there right now, singing their fool heads off. You were right. You're right about everything. And I aim to spend the rest of my life listening to what you tell me." And Nessa Birch turned her face up to the sky and heard them, the meadowlarks, singing in the pasture, the way they'd sung all along, the way he'd never heard until she taught him how. And she laughed and cried at the same time. And the preacher pronounced them man and wife. And Elias Alcott kissed his bride in the ranch yard, while an old man wept on the porch and a boy sobbed into his sleeve, and the whole wild singing West spread out around them. That night they packed. They would leave in the morning for the depot and take the train east all the way to the creek and the kitchen, and the mother Nessa had crossed a country to leave and was now crossing it back to hold one last time. Nessa moved through the house folding things into the big valise, and there was grief in it. There would always be grief in it now. This strange marriage born in the shadow of a deathbed. But there was something else too. Something that had been missing from her the whole time she'd lived there. And it took Elias a moment to name it. She wasn't performing. That was it. She wasn't being loud to fill a silence or useful to earn her keep or cheerful to hide the ache. She was just moving through the house. She'd made her own packing to go home, so she could come home again, and she was for the first time since she'd stepped off that train entirely herself. Elias. She'd stopped by the little writing desk. The drawer was open. The letters were in her hands, the whole stack of them, months of them, every unsent letter to a mother. She couldn't tell the truth. "What do I do with these?" He came and stood beside her. "You wrote all these to her, every night, and never sent a one 'cause every one of 'em said the same thing underneath. I'm lonesome, Mama. I made a mistake. I crossed the whole country and the man won't look at me, and I don't know how to come home." Her voice wavered. "I couldn't send her that. She'd have worried herself sick. She'd have blamed herself for teaching me to make myself so useful. I'd end up useful to a man who didn't want me for anything else." Elias took the stack of letters gently from her hands. "Then we don't send these," he said. "We bring 'em, and we read 'em to her. All of 'em. But you're going to add one more sentence to the end of each in your own hand before you read it out loud." He pressed them back into her palms. "And that sentence is, 'But it turned out all right, Mama. It turned out better than all right. He loves me. I'm home." Nessa looked down at the letters. Months of loneliness. Months of a hurt she'd never spoken. And she understood what he was giving her away to make even the grief into something she could carry away, to turn 30 letters of "I'm lonesome" into 30 letters that ended in "I'm loved." "She'll cry," Nessa whispered. "Good tears this time. She'll cry so hard." "Let her." Elias put his arm around his wife. "She raised a woman who'd kneel in the dirt for a dyin' stranger. She earned every good tear there is. Let's go give 'em to her." They stood there a long moment. The two of them. The letters between them. The meadowlarks quiet now in the dark pasture, and the house settled warm around them, and old Hobie snoring down the hall. Alive, alive because of her mother's hands and her mother's teaching passed down through a plain, steady, weeping-over-birds woman who had turned out to be the most alive thing Elias Alcott had ever known. And Nessa laughed once, soft and wet, and pressed her face against her husband's shoulder. "You know the worst part," she said. "My uncle told you, standin' in that parlor. He said you bought yourself a housekeeper, and my mother was the only person left on this earth who wanted me for me." She looked up at him. "And he was wrong, and I never got to tell him so, 'cause he left before I knew it myself. You didn't want a housekeeper, Elias. You just didn't know how to ask for the rest." "No," Elias said. "I didn't. But I know now." He kissed the top of her head. "Get some sleep, Mrs. Alcott. We've got a long way to travel, and a mother waitin' at the end of it who's about to meet the man who loves her daughter." And in the morning, they left for the depot together, the rancher who'd asked for nothing, and the woman who'd given him everything, riding east into the sunrise toward a deathbed and a wedding all at once, toward grief and toward joy, toward a creek and a kitchen and a dying mother who was even now asking every day, "Where's my Nessa? Where's my Nessa gone?" And this time at last, the answer was coming home to her. The train east took 4 days, and Elias Alcott, who had not left his own county in 7 years, spent every mile of it, learning who his wife was. She talked to strangers. Of course she did. By the second day, she knew the names of half the car, the widow with 3 children heading to St. Louis, the young soldier going home, the drummer who'd tried to sell her a hairbrush and ended up telling her about his sick daughter instead. She held babies so tired mothers could sleep. She shared out the food she'd packed until it was gone, and then bought more at the depot stops and shared that out too. And Elias watched her do it, this endless pouring out of herself, and understood a thing he hadn't before. "You do it for everyone," he said somewhere in Nebraska in the dark with her head on his shoulder and the whole car asleep around them. "Do what bull. Give. You give to everyone. The soldier, the widow, the babies. You gave to my whole ranch before you knew a one of us." He turned it over. "And nobody gives back. I've been watching. 4 days. All these people take what you pour out and not a one of 'em thinks to fill you up again." She was quiet a moment. "That's the deal," she said finally. "You give so folks'll keep you. My mother's arithmetic. You make yourself needed, and then you're safe." A small, dry laugh. "It works. It kept me fed my whole life. But it don't fill you up. You're right about that. It's a leaky bucket. You pour and pour, and you're always empty at the bottom. That ain't gonna be the deal no more." "No, no." Elias took her hand in the dark. "From here on, when you pour out, I fill back up. That's my job now. That's the whole of my job. You take care of everybody in the world, and I take care of you, deal." And Nessa Birch, who had been the one holding everyone up her whole life, who had never once in 40 years had a single soul offer to hold her, turned her face into her husband's shoulder in the dark of a train car, rattling east, and cried without a sound, and he felt it soak through his shirt, and he did not say a word, just held her and let her be for once the one who was carried, one who was. They reached the town late on the 4th day, a green, wet, close-grown country, all creeks and hollows and trees, pressing in so different from the wide, dry west that Elias felt the strangeness of it in his chest. This was where she was from. This was the creek she'd missed, the green she'd grieved for in his gray house under his big empty sky. He looked around at it and understood for the first time the size of what she'd given up to come to him. Her uncle met them at the depot. The old man's face when he saw Nessa step down off the train crumpled with relief, and then he saw Elias step down behind her, and his relief curdled into confusion, and then into something harder. "You came," he said to Nessa, and then to Elias, flat. "Why's he here?" "Uncle Amos." Nessa took his hands. "How is she?" "Is she alive?" "Barely. She's been holding on for you, girl. I don't know how, but she has. She's been saying your name in her sleep." His eyes went back to Elias, suspicious, protective. You didn't answer me. Why'd the rancher come? You said in your letters He's my husband, Uncle. The old man went still. We married 4 days ago, before we left. Nessa's chin came up, and there was something in her Elias had never seen, not the performing cheer, not the making useful, but a plain, fierce pride. He crossed the whole country with me, so Mama could meet him, so she could see me married before she... Her voice caught. He did that for me. For her. So don't you look at him like that, Uncle Amos. Don't you dare. This is the man who loves me. The one you said didn't exist. And Amos Birch looked at the tall, silent rancher standing there with his hat in his hands, and Elias looked back, and did not flinch, and did not explain himself. Just held the old man's eyes, and let him look his fill. You married her, Amos said slowly. I did. After what I said. In that parlor. The old man's voice roughened. I told her you bought yourself a housekeeper. I said her mother was the only one on this earth wanted her for herself. I said it to her face. I heard you, Elias said quietly. I was at the door. I heard every word. Amos flinched. And you were right, Elias went on. About what I'd done. I did buy myself a housekeeper. I did tell her no romance, no complications. Every cruel, true thing you said, I'd earned it. He turned his hat slow in his hands. But you were wrong about one thing. You said her mother was the only one wanted her for herself. And that ain't so no more. 'Cause I want her for herself. Took me too long to know it. Nearly cost me everything. But I know it now, and I married her knowing it, and I crossed a country to prove it, and I'd cross it again. He put his hat back on. Now, I'd be obliged if you'd take us to meet my wife's mother, while there's still time. For a long moment, Amos Birch didn't move. Then his hard old face broke, and he reached out and gripped Elias's shoulder hard, the way men do when words won't come, and he said thick, Well, all right then. All right. He wiped his face with the back of his hand. She's this way. And I'll tell you, son, she's gonna outlast us all just from the joy of it. Come on, come meet Mama Birch. The house sat back in a hollow by a creek, a small, worn place, and Nessa was out of the wagon before it fully stopped running for the door, the way she'd run for Hobie in the dirt, and Elias came behind her more slowly, hat in hand, heart in his throat, because he was about to meet the woman who'd made the woman he loved, and she was dying. And there was a terror in that he had no name for. Inside, in a back room, in a narrow bed by a window that looked out on the creek, a small gray woman lay propped on pillows, and when she saw her daughter in the doorway, her whole face lit like a lamp. Nessa, she breathed. Oh, oh, my Nessa, you came home, Mama. And Nessa was across the room and on her knees by the bed, with her mother's frail hands pressed to her face, and the two of them wept, and Elias stood in the doorway, feeling like he had no right to the sight. And Amos put a hand on his back and pushed him gently forward. Mama, Nessa said when she could speak. Mama, I brought someone. I have to tell you something. I have to tell you the best thing. She pulled back, wiping her face, laughing through the tears. I got married, Mama. The old woman's clouded eyes went wide. Married? 4 days ago, to a good man, the best man. He came all this way so you could meet him. Nessa turned and reached out her hand, and Elias crossed the room and took it, and let her draw him down to kneel by the bed beside her. Mama, this is Elias. Elias Alcott, my husband. And Mama Birch looked at the tall, grave rancher kneeling by her deathbed, and her thin hand came up trembling and touched his face, traced it the way a blind woman reads, and Elias held perfectly still and let her. You're the rancher, she whispered, the one from her letters. Elias's throat closed. She wrote you about me. She wrote me you were quiet. The old woman's mouth curved. She wrote me you barely spoke. She wrote me she was... A shadow crossed the ruined face. She was lonesome. My girl. My warm, laughing girl lonesome in a cold man's house. I prayed on it every night. I prayed the Lord would either warm you up or send her home. Her eyes searched his. Which did he do? And Elias Alcott, kneeling by a dying woman's bed with his wife's hand in his, said the truest thing he had ever said. "Both, ma'am," he said. "He warmed me up, and then he sent me home, and home turned out to be her." The old woman's eyes filled. "Say that again," she whispered. "Home turned out to be her." His voice broke on it. "I was 7 years dead when your daughter walked off a train laughing at my sky, ma'am. 7 years. I'd buried a wife and a baby, and I'd buried myself right along with them, and I asked the marriage agency for a plain, sensible woman to run my house 'cause I never wanted to feel anything again as long as I lived." He gripped Nessa's hand. "And they sent me the most alive thing I ever saw, and she cracked me open like an egg, and I fought it every step, 'cause I was scared, ma'am. I was so scared, and I near let her get on a train and leave forever rather than tell her the truth." His eyes were streaming now, and he didn't care. "But I told her. Just in time I told her, and I married her, and I brought her home to you so you'd know, so you'd never have to wonder that your girl is loved. She's loved, Mama Birch. She's loved more than I've got words for. You raised the finest woman that ever lived, and I get to spend my life proving I know it. That's what the Lord did. He did both." The room was silent but for weeping, and Mama Birch, dying small, her hand against her new son's wet face, began to laugh. It was the same laugh. Elias knew it the instant he heard it. The same warm, helpless, unbothered laugh Nessa had laughed, getting off the train, the laugh that had cracked his whole life open. And here it was, its source, its wellspring coming out of a dying woman in a narrow bed. And he understood in a rush where his wife had gotten it, and understood that it would not die when this woman died, because it lived on in her daughter, and it would live on in whatever children came after this laugh. This warm, bright, unkillable thing passed down hand to hand across the generations like a lit candle. "Oh," Mama Birch said, laughing and crying at once. "Oh, you dear man, you dear, dear, slow, foolish man. You got there in the end." She patted his face. "That's all any of us do if we're lucky. We get there in the end." They stayed 11 days. 11 days Elias Alcott would remember for the rest of his life. The doctor had said weeks, maybe less, and the old woman had been holding on by a thread for her daughter, and everyone braced for the thread to break. But it didn't break. It held. Because Nessa was there, and Nessa did what Nessa did. She poured herself out. Except this time, for the first time, the person she poured into was the one who'd taught her how. She cooked her mother's own recipes back to her, spooning broth between the old woman's lips. She read to her. She sang to her. And Elias heard for the first time where the singing came from too, because Mama Birch sang along in a thread of a voice, the old songs, the hymns, the foolish little tunes. And the two of them filled that small house with music the way Nessa had filled his. She washed her mother, and turned her, and eased her hands sure and gentle. Her mother's own doctoring hands come home at last to doctor the woman they'd learned from. And every evening she read the letters. All of them. The whole stack. 30 letters of loneliness read aloud by lamplight to the woman they'd been written to and never sent. Nessa read them and wept through them the months of ache. The "I'm lonesome. Mama, I made a mistake. The man won't look at me." And Mama Birch listened and held her daughter's hand and did not once say she was sorry or she'd told her so, just listened the way Nessa had learned to listen from her. And at the end of each letter, Nessa added the sentence Elias had given her. "But it turned out all right, Mama. It turned out better than all right. He loves me. I'm home." And every single time the old woman wept the good tears, the ones Elias had promised, and every single time she said the same thing, "I know, baby. I can see it. Look at him sitting there. I can see it plain." On the 11th night, Mama Birch called Elias to her alone. Nessa had fallen asleep at last, worn to the bone, curled in a chair by the fire, and Amos had gone to bed, and the house was quiet, and the old woman's clear moment came the way they do at the end, the last flare of the candle before it gutters. She took Elias's big rough hand in both her small cold ones, and looked at him with eyes gone suddenly sharp and knowing. "Sit," she said. "I ain't got long, and there's a thing I have to say, and I'll only get to say it once." Elias sat. "My Nessa," the old woman said. "She's gonna spend her whole life taking care of everybody but herself. You know that. You've seen it." Her grip tightened. "I taught her that. God forgive me, I taught her. I told her, make yourself useful, make yourself needed. That's how a plain girl gets kept. I meant it kind. It was all I knew. But it was poison, and I fed it to her, and she's been dying of it slow her whole life, pouring herself out, and never letting a soul pour back, 'cause somewhere down deep she believes she ain't worth pouring into. That she's only worth what she does." The old woman's eyes bored into his. "You understand what I'm telling you?" "I understand," Elias said. "I told her on the train, I told her when she pours out I'd fill her back up, that it was my job now." "Then you understand more than most." Mama Birch's face eased just slightly. "But hear me good. She won't let you. Not easy. She'll fight it. She'll make herself so busy taking care of you that you can't get a hand in edgewise. She'll perform for you the cheer, the singin', the makin' do, 'cause performing feels safer to her than just being loved for nothing. You'll have to fight her for it. Every day. You'll have to catch her when she's tired and not let her hide it. You'll have to say, 'Stop, sit down, let me,' and you'll have to mean it over and over for years till she finally believes down in her bones that you'd keep her even if she never cooked another meal, or sang another note, or was one bit of use to a living soul." The old woman's voice cracked. "Can you do that? Can you love her for nothing, for no reason but that she's her, 'cause that's the one thing she's never had? Her whole life, not from me. I loved her for how good she was, even me. Can you love her for nothing at all?" And Elias Alcott, who had buried a wife and a son and himself, who had asked for a housekeeper, and been sent a whole weather system of a woman who had traveled 1,000 miles to kneel at this bedside, looked the dying woman in the eyes and said, "I already do." Mama Birch searched his face for a long, long moment, and then she let out a breath that seemed to take something with it, some last held-in thing, some weight she'd carried, and she sank back into the pillows, and she smiled. "Then I can go," she whispered. "Then it's all right. Then I did right by her in the end, even if I did wrong by her all the way along, 'cause I found her a man who'll love her for nothing." Her eyes drifted to her sleeping daughter by the fire. "Look at her, my warm girl, my laughing girl." Her voice was fading now, going soft, going far. "She was born laughing, did she tell you? Came into this world laughing when she should have been crying. Midwife had never seen the like. Said this one's gonna be trouble. Said this one's too full of life to fit in an ordinary world." The old woman's eyes closed. She was right. She never did fit. Too much. Always too much, my Nessa. Everywhere she went, too big, too loud, too warm, too much. A smile ghosted her lips. "And you're the first soul ever looked at all that too much and said more. Give me more. Don't shrink. Don't fit. Just be." Her hand went slack in his. "That's the whole secret, son. That's the whole of it. She spent her life trying to be small enough to keep. And you're the one who wanted her big." And her breathing changed. "Nessa," Elias said, rising, his heart lurching. "Nessa, wake up." Nessa came awake all at once, the way people do when they've been waiting in their sleep, and she was at the bedside in an instant, with her mother's hand in hers. Mama, I'm here. I'm right here." The old woman's eyes opened one last time, found her daughter's face. And there was no fear in them, none at all, only that same warm, unkillable light. "My Nessa," she breathed. "You came home." "I came home, Mama." "And you're loved." "I'm loved, Mama. I'm home and I'm loved. You did right by me. You hear? You did right by me, and I love you, and it's all right to rest now. It's all right. I'm all right. Rest now, Mama. Rest." And Mama Birch looked from her daughter's face to Elias's and back again, and she smiled the last smile, and she said so soft they had to lean close to hear it. Both. He did both. And she was gone. She went the way the truest things come. Grief and joy, at once, both together, inseparable, with her daughter's hand in hers, and her new son kneeling at the foot of the bed, and the creek running soft outside the window. she'd looked at all her dying days. She went loved, and knowing her daughter was loved. And that was all she'd held on for all those weeks, all those whispered, "Where's my Nessa?" She'd held on to see her girl safe, and she'd seen it, and she let go. Nessa did not perform her grief. That was how Elias knew how deep it went. She did not make herself useful. She did not busy herself. She simply lay her head down on her mother's still chest and wept the raw, unhidden weeping of a woman who felt everything. And Elias came around the bed and gathered her up off her mother's body, and held her the way he'd promised, the way you hold someone who has spent her whole life holding everyone else. "I've got you," he said into her hair. "I've got you. You don't have to be strong. You don't have to be useful. You don't have to be one single thing right now, but sad, and I've got you, and I ain't letting go. Pour it out, all of it. I'll fill you back up. That's my job. Remember, that's my whole job now. Pour it out, Nessa. I've got you." And she poured it out. She wept for the mother she'd lost, and the years she'd spent lonesome, and the poison she'd been fed with love, and the smallness she'd folded herself into her whole life. She wept in her husband's arms in that small house by the creek, while the fire burned low, and he held her through every wave of it, and did not once tell her to hush, did not once flinch from the size of her grief, did not run the man who'd run from his own kitchen, from his own feelings, from 7 years of life, did not run now. He stayed. He held. He filled her back up, and somewhere in the depth of the night spent, hollowed out, emptied all the way down. Nessa Birch, Nessa Alcott, lifted her ruined face from her husband's chest, and looked at him, and said the thing her mother had spent a whole life and a whole death trying to teach her. "You'd keep me," she whispered. "Wouldn't you? Even if I wasn't any use to you at all. Even if I never cooked or cleaned or fixed one thing, you'd keep me anyway. Just for nothing. Just for me." And Elias Alcott looked at his wife, emptied, exhausted, not performing, not useful, not one bit of use to anyone in that moment, just a grieving woman in his arms, and he had never in his life wanted to keep anything so much. "Just for you," he said. "For nothing. For no reason on this earth but that you're you, and I love you, and I'd walk into the ground beside you before I'd let you go." He pressed his lips to her forehead. "Your mother made me promise, right at the end. She made me promise I'd love you for nothing. And I told her the truth. I told her I already did." Nessa went very still. "She made you promise that—" "Those were near her last words to me, alone while you slept. She said you'd spent your whole life trying to be small enough to keep." His voice thickened. "And she said I was the first one ever looked at all your too much and asked for more." And Nessa Birch put her face back against her husband's chest in that house of grief by that creek she'd missed so long, and she did the impossible thing, the thing her mother had died hoping she'd learn to do. She let herself be held for nothing. She didn't get up to make coffee. She didn't busy her hands. She didn't perform 1 ounce of strength. She just lay there in the arms of a man who'd love her whether she was useful or not, and let him hold her, and let herself be kept, not for what she did, but for who she was, for the very first time in her whole long life. Outside the creek ran on in the dark, and somewhere far to the west, on a ranch under a big empty sky, an old man's healing heart beat steady in the night, and a boy dreamed of finishing his letters, and the meadowlark slept in the east pasture waiting to sing again, when the woman who'd taught the rancher how to hear them came home. But that was still ahead of them. For now there was a burying to be done, and a mother to be laid in the green ground by her creek, and a grief to be lived all the way through. And Nessa would live it through the way she'd taught everyone around her to live everything through fully, without hiding feeling all of it. And this time, for the first time, she would not live it alone. They buried Mama Birch in the green ground by her creek, and Nessa stood at the graveside and did not perform 1 ounce of it. She let herself be seen, wrecked and hollowed and small, and Elias stood beside her with his arm around her, and did not once let go, and the whole little town watched the plain warm rancher's wife bury her mother, and every soul there understood, without being told that she was loved. They stayed a week after the burying to help Amos set the house to rights and to gather the scattered sisters who came in one by one off the trains and to divide what little there was. And Nessa moved through all of it with a quiet Elias had never seen in her. Not the performing cheer, not the busy hands, just a woman who had lost her mother and was letting herself have lost her. On the last night, Amos took Elias out to the porch. "I owe you an apology, son," the old man said, "for what I said in that parlor, for how I looked at you at the depot." "You don't owe me a thing. You were protecting her. I'd have done the same. I was wrong about you. You weren't. Not then. Then you had me dead to rights." Elias looked out at the dark creek. "I was a man who bought himself a housekeeper. You saw true. It's just I changed. She changed me. That's the only difference between the man you cussed in that parlor and the one standing here." Amos was quiet a moment. "Her mother loved you," he said finally. "Those last days. Loved you like her own. She told me the day before she passed, she said, 'Amos, I can die easy now. I found my Nessa somebody who'll keep her for nothing.'" His voice roughened. 20 years that woman worried over that girl. Worried she'd end up alone. Worried she'd give herself away to folks who'd take and never keep her. And she died easy 'cause of you." He gripped Elias's shoulder hard the way he had at the depot. "So don't you make a liar of her here. Don't you ever make her mother a liar. You keep that girl, for nothing. Till you're both in the ground." "Till we're both in the ground," Elias said. "I swear it on your sister's grave." And Amos nodded satisfied and wiped his face, and the two men stood on the porch a while in the kind of silence that isn't empty at all. The journey home took 4 days, same as the journey out, but it was a different 4 days. Nessa was quiet. She grieved openly in waves, and Elias let her, and filled her back up. And when the grief ebbed, and she'd start to reach for someone else to tend a tired mother, a fussing baby, a lonesome stranger, he'd catch her hand gentle and say, "Not this trip. This trip you rest." And she'd fight it a little out of habit, and then she'd let herself be still. She was learning. Slow and against 40 years of grain, but learning. Learning to be kept for nothing. They came back to Coulter Flats on a bright cold morning, and the whole ranch was waiting at the depot. Hobie first. Hobie on his feet, color in his cheeks, alive, propped on a cane, but standing. And when Nessa came down off the train, he opened his arms, and she went into them, and the old man held her and said gruff into her hair, "You saved my worthless old life, and then you went and buried your mama. Girl, there ain't a thing in this world you can't carry, is there?" And Nessa laughed and cried at once and said, "I didn't carry it alone this time, Hobie. That's the difference." And the old man looked over her shoulder at Elias and gave a single slow nod, man to man, and Elias understood he'd passed some test he hadn't known he was taking. Then little Joe, who'd grown it seemed a foot in 3 weeks, barreling forward shouting, "Miss Nessa, Mrs. Alcott, I'm up to the T's. Cyrus helped me every night. I can near read the whole Bible. I read Hobie, the whole story of Ruth off the page, my own self." And Nessa dropped to her knees right there on the platform and pulled the boy into her arms and wept over his shorn head, and little Joe, who'd sworn he was too old to be babied, hugged her back with all his strength and didn't care who saw. And Cyrus last hanging back the way he did hat in his hands. He didn't say much. He never did. He just stepped forward when Nessa reached for him and let her embrace him stiff and shy. And then he said low, so only she and Elias could hear, "Ranch ran fine, but it weren't the same. Wasn't any singing in it." He looked at Elias. "Glad you're home. Both of you. Place needs its heart back. Its heart." That was what Cyrus called her, the silent, grieving man who'd told Elias the dead don't need you faithful. He called her the ranch's heart, and nobody argued because it was true. They rode out to the ranch in the wagon, all of them piled in together, and Nessa looked at the gray house coming up out of the bowl of land, the house she'd first seen, and thought looked like a place a man had stopped living, except it wasn't gray anymore. White curtains in the windows. Flowers gone leggy but still blooming in the garden she'd planted in the dirt, he'd said was good for nothing. Smoke from the chimney. A home. "You kept the garden watered," she said to Cyrus. "Every day," he said. "Little Joe and me. You said the tomatoes wanted it every day. A pause. Peppers we let dry out between, like you said. And Nessa had to press her hand to her mouth because she'd told them that the day she was leaving forever, when she thought she'd never see any of it grow, and they'd remembered they'd tended her garden all through her grief 1,000 miles away, and it was the smallest thing, and it undid her completely. That night, after the hands had gone, and Hobie was settled, and little Joe had read them a psalm to show off, and been sent to bed glowing, Elias took his wife by the hand and led her out of the house down toward the east pasture in the dark, and she followed without asking where. He brought her to the creek she'd missed. Not her mother's creek, that one was 1,000 miles east in the green ground where her mother slept. But a creek. His creek, the one that ran through his east pasture. The one he'd stopped fishing 7 years ago because he used to fish it with a wife who died. "I never brought you here," he said. "All the months you lived in my house, I never once brought you to the water. You told me you missed your creek. You told me at the depot that day you tried to leave. You said you missed your creek and your sense of place, and I heard you, and I still never brought you to mine." He was quiet a moment. "'Cause it was hers. Mary's. I couldn't. But I want you to have it now. I want it to be yours. I want everything of mine to be yours." And Nessa sat down at the edge of the water and pulled off her shoes and put her bare feet in the cold creek and did not pretend she was fine, did not perform a single thing, just sat there in the dark with her feet in the water and let the grief and the peace move through her together the way they had since her mother died inseparable. Elias sat beside her. "I've been thinking," he said, "the whole way home, about something your mother said to me, at the end." "What did she say?" "She said you spent your whole life trying to be small enough to keep, folding yourself down, making yourself useful so nobody'd have a reason to send you away." He looked at her profile in the dark. "And I've been thinking how I did the same thing, different but the same. I made myself empty enough that nothing could ever be taken from me. You shrank down so you'd be kept. I hollowed out so I'd be safe. Two ways of being scared of the same thing." He shook his head. "Your mother saw it in you in a minute. Took me 40 years to see it in myself." "We're a fine pair," Nessa said softly. "A woman too scared to take up room, and a man too scared to feel anything. We were." Elias reached over and took her hand. "We ain't anymore. That's the whole of what I want to say. Whatever we were, we ain't it anymore. You buried your mother, and you didn't hide 1 ounce of it. And I sat by a dying woman and told her the truth about my own heart out loud, which I couldn't have done a season ago to save my life. We fixed each other, Nessa. We broke each other open, and we fixed each other." His voice caught. "You gave me back my life. Least I can do is spend it making sure you never have to shrink again." Nessa was quiet a long moment, her feet in the cold water, her hand in her husband's. "I want to find you a book," she said. Elias blinked. "What?" "A book. You told me that night in the kitchen before I left you, told me you used to read, every night. You and Mary by the fire, and you stopped when she died. Stopped readin', stopped singin', stopped everything." She turned to look at him. "You gave me back my mother's last days. You gave me a place to put my grief. You gave me a creek to put my feet in. And all I've got to give back, it isn't much, but I want to give you back your reading. I'm going to find you a book. And I'm going to read you the sad ones, and you're going to read me the funny ones the way you did with her, except it won't be to keep her ghost warm, it'll be to keep us warm. Is that all right? Would that be all right? To read together, to make it ours instead of hers?" And Elias Alcott, the rancher who'd forgotten how who'd tried to read 3 pages of a dead woman's poems and set them down in shame, looked at his living wife by the living creek, and felt the last frozen thing in him break loose and float away downstream. "That'd be all right," he said thick. "That'd be more than all right. I'd like that more than near anything." They sat by the water a long while after that and did not talk much and were not lonely. That night Nessa did not announce it. She never announced anything. Any more she'd stopped needing to prove her usefulness, stopped needing the credit, stopped performing her care. She just did the quiet thing and let it be found. Elias came in late from settling the horses, and there on the kitchen table beside his cold cup of coffee sat a small book. No note, no explanation, just a book waiting the way care waits when it doesn't need to be seen. She'd found it in the bottom of a trunk, one of Mary's. He saw one of his first wife's old volumes poems, but she'd tucked a scrap of paper in it as a marker, and on the scrap in her plain warm hand she'd written, "The sad ones are marked. You read me the funny ones. Start whenever you're ready. There's no hurry. There's the rest of our lives." And Elias Alcott sat down at the table where she'd fed his men, and taught little Joe his letters, and doctored old Hobie back from death, and he picked up the book, and he opened it, and for the first time in 7 years he read. He read slow. His mind wandered, and he pulled it back. It was like a muscle gone soft from not being used, and it ached, and he did it anyway. And when Nessa came down in her nightclothes to see what was keeping him, she found her husband bent over a book in the lamplight, reading his lips, moving faint over the words, and she stopped in the doorway and did not interrupt. She just watched him. The most alive thing she'd ever done, she thought, was walk off that train laughing, when every sensible bone in her body had said, "This is a mistake. This cold, quiet man will never want you. Turn around and go home." She'd laughed instead. She'd laughed at his sky and talked to his sparrow and flat refused to shrink down into the plain, small, useful thing he'd ordered. And it had cracked him open. Her too much had been exactly enough. It had been the medicine. The one thing in the world that could have brought a dead man back. Her mother had been right. Too much to fit an ordinary world. And Elias Alcott had looked at all that too much and said more. "You're readin'," she said softly. He looked up, and he smiled the smile Hobie remembered the laughingest man in the county come home at last to his own face. "I'm readin'," he said. "This one's a sad one, though. You marked it. Come sit, and I'll know. You read me this one, and I'll find us a funny one for after." And Nessa came and sat and took the book and read him the sad one in her warm, low voice, and he listened, and when she finished, he took the book back and turned the pages, till he found something foolish, something light, and he read it to her, stumbling and slow, and she laughed, the real laugh, the train platform laugh, her mother's laugh. The unkillable one, and the sound of it filled the gray house, that wasn't gray anymore, and old Hobie, hearing it through the wall, smiled in his sleep. The preacher came again weeks later, Reverend Coyle making his regular round through Coulter Flats, and he stopped by the ranch to see how the hurried marriage he'd performed had fared. He found the two of them on the porch in the evening, in the two chairs that had somehow become one chair's worth of togetherness, Elias reading aloud, and Nessa mending, and neither of them lonely, and he stood at the bottom of the steps a moment before they noticed him. "Well," he said, "I've married a great many couples in my time, and I'll tell you, I've learned to spot the ones that took." He smiled. "This one took." "Reverend." Elias rose. "Didn't hear you ride up. Sit. Nessa is their coffee. Stay put." Nessa was already up, and then she caught herself, caught the old reflex of leaping to serve, and she looked at Elias, and the two of them shared a small private smile, because they both knew what she'd almost done, and she sat back down. "There's coffee on the stove, Reverend. You know where the cups are, you've been here before, and I'm tired and I'm going to sit with my husband. You're family enough to pour your own." And Reverend Coyle laughed delighted, because he'd been in 100 ranch houses and never once been told to pour his own coffee by a woman, and he understood it for exactly what it was. Not rudeness, but the deepest kind of welcome, the kind where you're family enough not to be served. Now that, he said, is a healthy marriage, woman who'll make a preacher pour his own coffee. He went and poured it and came back and sat on the step. "So, how are you two? Truly I married you in a terrible hurry for a terrible sad reason. I've wondered how you fared." And Elias looked at Nessa, and Nessa looked at Elias, and it was Nessa who answered. "My mother died holding my hand," she said, "and she died knowing I was loved. And I came home to a garden my ranch hands kept alive for me, while I grieved 1,000 miles away, and an old man I'd saved standing up to meet me, and a boy who'd learned his letters clear to the T's, and a husband who reads me poems by the fire, and won't let me pour myself out without pouring me back full." Her eyes filled, but she was smiling. We don't feel saved, Reverend. Or rescued. I know that's what the storybooks say, that a woman gets rescued. But it wasn't like that. Nobody rescued anybody. We understood each other. Finally. Two scared broke people who figured out how to stop being scared. That's not rescue. That's better than rescue. It's understanding, Elias said quietly. It's understanding, Nessa agreed. And Reverend Coyle nodded slow and drank his coffee and looked out at the big western sky going gold and rose over the pasture and said, "You know, in all my years, I don't believe I've heard it put better. Folks think love is being saved. But the saved kind wears off. It's the understood kind that lasts." He raised his cup to them. "You two got the lasting kind. I'd stake my collar on it." He left before dark with his coffee drunk and his blessing given, and the two of them watched him ride off, and then they sat in the gold light a while longer. "You hear 'em?" Elias said. Nessa tilted her head. And she did. The meadowlarks in the east pasture singing their fool heads off the way they had all along. The way he'd never heard until she taught him how. "I hear 'em," she said. "I never would have. Not in 100 years. Not without you." He took her hand. "You know what you were that day you got off the train. You keep calling yourself plain. Steady and plain and emotional about birds. You said it standing on the platform like a warning, like you were telling me the worst of you up front, so I couldn't say I wasn't warned." He shook his head slow. "But it was never the worst of you. It was the best. Steady, you held this whole broke place together with your two hands. And emotional about birds, Lord Nessa, you taught a dead man to hear the meadowlarks. There's not a thing plain about you. There never was. Plain was just the name you gave yourself so nobody could take anything from you. Same as I made myself empty. We were both hidin'. And we don't have to hide anymore." Nessa Birch. Nessa Alcott looked out at the pasture where the meadowlark sang in the last gold light beside the man who'd crossed a country for her and buried her mother with her and read her poems by the fire and would keep her. She knew now all the way down in her bones. She knew it. Keep her for nothing. Keep her for herself. Keep her big and loud and warm and too much. Keep her exactly as she was, and she stopped shrinking. She felt it happen. The lifelong reflex to fold herself small to make herself useful to earn her keep. It let go all at once, like a hand unclenching after 40 years. And she took up all the room she was meant to take, up all the space. Her mother's midwife had said was too much for an ordinary world, and she let herself be exactly as big and alive as she'd been born to be. "No," she said, "we don't have to hide anymore." And she was home. Not because she'd stayed, she hadn't stayed. She'd left, she'd gotten on a train and gone 1,000 miles and buried her mother and come back. Not because she'd been rescued, nobody rescued her. She'd saved an old man's life and buried her mother and carried her own grief. Not because a man had wanted a housekeeper and gotten a wife. She was home because she had chosen it. Because a woman who had spent her whole life making herself small enough to be kept had finally been loved big enough to stop, and had chosen with her whole enormous, unshrunk heart to stay. Elias Alcott had written a marriage agency asking for a reliable, capable, sensible woman. No romance, no complications. He had asked for the smallest, safest, emptiest thing he could think to want, and a train had come in late, and a woman had gotten off it laughing at the sky, and she had turned out to be the most alive thing he would ever know. Alive enough to walk into his gray, dead world and crack it open like an egg. Alive enough to teach him to feel and read and sing and hear the meadowlarks again. Alive enough to change the shape of his entire life. He had asked for plain and steady. He had been sent a miracle. And the woman who once called herself plain, who folded herself small her whole life long so the world would have a reason to keep her, finally understood the truth. Her mother died teaching her she had never needed to be small to be kept. She had never needed to earn a single thing. She only needed to be loved for nothing at all, and she was wholly and forever by a man who had learned it just in time. She was home. She was loved. and she would never ever shrink again.